Coffee or caffeine has a half-life of about 5 to 6 hours. In other words, after about 5 to 6 hours, 50% of that caffeine is still in your system, which means that caffeine has a quarter life of 10 to 12 hours. So if you have a cup of coffee at midday, it would be the equivalent of you getting into bed at midnight, and before you turn the light out, you swig a quarter of a cup of coffee and you hope for a good night of sleep, and it's probably not going to happen. But even if you're one of those people who says, look, I can have an espresso with dinner, I fall asleep fine, and I stay asleep, so no harm, no foul. That's not quite true either, because a cup of coffee in the evening will decrease the amount of deep sleep that you get, deep non-REM sleep, by somewhere between 20 to 30%.
Have you done any research, or do you know of anyone that's done any research? Sometimes what I'll find is if I try to just close my eyes for 20 minutes at 3 o'clock, I don't necessarily fall asleep. And it's actually pretty rare that I would get into a deep sleep. But I could be in that quasi-sleep stage. But sometimes it's more just, I've just closed my eyes and just try not to think about anything major, politics, the craziness of the world. And that in and of itself is almost enough of a reset. Have they done any research on that just the process of just 20 minutes with your eyes closed and maybe just getting into that initial phase could be enough?
Yeah, we have done studies on that. And that's exactly what we're finding, that even that quiet rest where you have your eyes closed and you're somewhat disengaged. Now, if you look at the brain itself, it's actually dipping like a little beak into water. It's dipping itself and having a little soupçon of sort of sleep during that time. Most of that time, you're not aware that you're asleep because it's still lighter stages of sleep. But it can be restorative. It can have benefits for your mood, for your emotions, even some benefits for cardiovascular health. Is it as potent as getting into sleep? No, it's not. But is it better than just constantly trying to power through and grab another cup of coffee and hope for the best? Absolutely, it's much better than that. So it's all a range. I think there's a gradient of different conscious states that our brain goes through, and some of them can really be beneficial. It doesn't have to all be about sleep.
All right, so you mentioned coffee. I already showed you the coffee cup. I'm a coffee guy. When I wake up in the morning, the first thing that I think about is that cup of coffee. Sometimes I'm thinking about it as I'm going to bed the night before, and I probably have a second cup most days. Am I doing something wrong here? Am I overly caffeinating my brain? Am I harming my sleep? Am I doing something too unnatural to my normal rhythm?
Based on what you just said, you're not doing anything wrong. And I would actually recommend drink coffee. Which sounds strange from someone like me, but when it comes to coffee, just like with drugs, the dose and the timing makes the poison. So first, there are some wonderful health associations with coffee. And that is, I think, very strong evidence. By the way, it has nothing to do with the caffeine, though. That the principal reason you get health associations with a cup of coffee is because the coffee bean contains most of the antioxidants that people eat or consume, because our diets are not particularly enriched the way that we eat in this modern era in antioxidants. And it's left to the coffee bean, the humble coffee bean, to carry the weight of most people's antioxidant needs. So a cup of coffee or 2 cups of coffee or even 3 cups of coffee in the morning, that's just fine. Try to cut yourself off after about midday for most people. And here's the reason why. Firstly, coffee or caffeine has a half-life of about 5 to 6 hours. In other words, after about 5 to 6 hours, 50% of that caffeine is still in your system, which means that caffeine has a quarter life of 10 to 12 hours. So if you have a cup of coffee at midday, it would be the equivalent of you getting into bed at midnight, and before you turn the light out, you swig a quarter of a cup of coffee and you hope for a good night of sleep, and it's probably not going to happen. But even if you're one of those people who says, look, I can have an espresso with dinner, I fall asleep fine, and I stay asleep, so no harm, no foul. That's not quite true either, because a cup of coffee in the evening will decrease the amount of deep sleep that you get, deep non-REM sleep, by somewhere between 20 to 30%. Now, for me to take away that amount of deep sleep from you, I would probably have to age you by about 15 years. Or you could just do it every night with an espresso. So I think, I want to be clear here. I'm just a scientist, and I'm not here to tell anyone how to live their life. That's not my job. All I want to do is, give you the science behind sleep and things like caffeine so that people can make an informed choice. Life is to be lived to a certain degree.
Yeah. So when you meet the people who are like, oh, if I have a cup of coffee after 4 p.m., I'm up all night, versus the guy that can have the double espresso at 11, is that partly just how they're wired? I mean, is that just their physiology?
It is their physiology. And in fact, it's their genes. And we know these genes. There are several different genes. And if you want to sort of get a little bit nerdy, it's called cytochrome P450. And it determines the speed of breakdown, of decomposition, essentially, of the caffeine in your system. Now, some people have a version of that enzyme where they will break down the caffeine very quickly. Other people, and unfortunately I'm one of them, have a version of that enzyme where the caffeine metabolism is very, very slow. So if I have a cup of coffee at 9 a.m. in the morning after waking up at 6:30 or 7 in the morning, even that usually leads to me not having a great night of sleep. So there are individual differences, and we understand the genetic basis of those.
What about some of the habits of good sleepers? One of the things that I've been trying to do for the last couple of years, probably about 2 years now, is I try not to bring my phone in the bedroom. So I don't want the phone to be the last thing that I look at when my head hits the pillow, and I don't want it to be the first thing that I see when I wake up in the morning. That's been pretty helpful for me. Do you guys recommend certain habits, or have you found that certain people just have better habits related to actually getting to that deep sleep?
Yeah, I think you mentioned a great one here, which is the phone. The invasion of technology into the bedroom has been a harmful influence on our sleep in the modern era. And in a way, though, that genie is out the bottle and it's not going in anytime soon. So there's no point in me necessarily saying, it's got to be a technology-free environment. What I would say, though, is you've probably had that experience where you know that you need to get up for an early morning flight, or there's something that you have to do ultra important the next morning. You know that night of sleep is just not going to be the best night. And it's almost as though if you've got to wake up at 5 in the morning for your flight, you wake up at 4:58 before your alarm.
Yep.
And the reason is because the brain stays in this very shallow form of sleep. It's not very restorative sleep. And it's a phenomenon that's called anticipatory anxiety. In other words, something is upcoming, and the brain goes into almost this threat detection state because of the anxiety, and your sleep is shallow for understandable reasons. I mention this because having your phone there is a kind of diet version of that. It's sort of anxiety light, LITE, for the next day. Because you're right, for most of us, and I've been guilty of this in the past, the first thing that we do when we wake up in the morning is reach across and we swipe right and we open up the phone. And we know that there is waiting for us just a tsunami of anxiety, of emails, social media. It all comes through.
Yeah.
And what that does is that it trains your brain to expect that type of anxiety jag each and every morning. And so when you go to bed at night, you're not going to have that restorative, restful sleep. The other thing with technology, by the way, in the evening is that it causes what's called sleep procrastination. It's a real thing where, you're perfectly tired. You could fall asleep, but you have your phone there and you think, oh, I should just check Facebook one last time, and I'm just going to order that thing on Amazon, and Dave Rubin had this great section. I'm going to watch that, and all of a sudden it's 20 minutes later, and you do that each and every night. It's like compounding interest on a loan, and it can really degrade your sleep. So I would say the rule of thumb, if you want to try and hack that, is you can only use your phone in the bedroom when you're standing up. And after about 5 minutes of doing that, you as soon as you sit down or you want to lie down, that's the time you got to put the phone away.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about lifestyles instead of nonstop yelling, check out our lifestyle playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're both right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.